Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Access Vikings podcast. I'm Emily Leiker, joined by my Minnesota Star Tribune colleagues Ben Goessling and Andrew Krammer. We're out here at TCO Performance Center. We've just got done watching practice Friday afternoon. We're going to talk to KOC shortly. We'll get the game statuses shortly. So just the preface that anything we're talking about injuries, it's before those final game statuses come out. But let's start with what we did see at practice injury-wise. I think notably center Ryan Kelly and left tackle Justin School, who were both in the concussion protocol this week, were out there practicing. That's only a first step, though, and not an indication necessarily that either of those guys will be able to play this week.
Right, yeah, they need to get through a day of regular kind of non-contact practice, and then you go through the checks to see if there's any more symptoms, get cleared by the neurological consultant, and then you go through a practice where you have contact, and once you get through that, you are ready to come back and you're fully cleared to exit the concussion protocol. As far as we've seen, this would only be the first step in that process. I suppose it's, well, no, I was going to say it's possible they could get contact between now and Sunday, but they're not going to make the time for that. They don't do contact practices on Saturday. So this being a first step probably means both of those two guys are out for this week. And I just wouldn't think they push it with a guy like Ryan Kelly anyway when he's had now 4 concussions in his career, at least the ones that we have documented.
Yeah, so we saw Michael Juergens out there at center. He's the guy who got his NFL debut for Ryan Kelly last week against the Falcons. We also saw Christian Darrisaw out there after getting a planned rest day on Thursday. What do we make of his practice rhythm and rhyme and whether or not he's going to play on Sunday?
Well, it sounds like this is going to be the way they go about it the rest of the year, where he's going to practice on a Wednesday, probably get the day off or be a lighter day on a Thursday, and then come back on Friday. So that feels like one of those things, if you're having to manage through that all the way through the year, I'm sure that's not an ideal scenario. I wonder, and we'll get more detail on this as we go, but the more I've learned about this, the more that we've kind of gone through it, I wonder if there's still more hurdles to clear than initially they thought. Darrisaw said last Friday when I talked to him about it, he said there's still room for improvement in my knee. So that's one of those things that if that's where we're still at after a couple of weeks into the regular season, then maybe there's still a ways to go here yet.
Yeah, and this comes a couple weeks after Kevin O'Connell had mentioned a good possibility, or at least Christian's work in the offseason setting up the good possibility for him to play in Chicago 2 weeks ago. Emily, we saw something interesting at practice with their backup plan, and we could have assumed it just based on experience. But with School maybe not being available on Sunday, and if Darrisaw doesn't go, what do you think they'll do?
Yeah, well, they had Blake Brandel out there behind School in the line, obviously. On Sunday night, they'd put Walter Rouse in, but we talked about earlier in the week on the podcast, like Brandel has experience out at tackle. You probably want someone with a little bit more experience next to rookie guard Donovan Jackson, just a little bit more stability out there on the edge. And is Brandel up to the level of Darrisaw or even School? I don't think so, but still better, a little bit more strength there than they maybe had on Sunday night.
If they went with Rouse, and if it was Rouse, Jackson, Juergens, those guys have a combined like 140 NFL snaps, all within the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's a lot to ask when Trey Hendrickson is lining up across from you on Sunday afternoon. Trey Hendrickson, who I think has 15 pressures in 2 games. I think he has as many pressures as the rest of the Bengals combined. So the rest of that pass rush is not terribly decorated, but Trey Hendrickson certainly is, and that would be the guy you're going to see a lot, whoever is at left tackle on Sunday afternoon.
Outside linebacker Andrew Van Ginkel looks poised to play. He's been out there this week. He was without the red no-contact jersey both on Thursday and then today, Friday. Same with Jeff Okudah, who's been full go all week. Other injuries, there's still some guys working through some limited stuff. It's been a long list this week, but we've at least seen those guys out there. The only ones who hadn't practiced prior to today were Kelly, School, McCarthy, and then Darrisaw had his rest day yesterday.
Well, it's hard for us to tell at this point, but is this finally the week Harrison Smith comes back? I imagine, as Emily detailed, we don't know his status, but I imagine he'll be questionable.
Yeah, I would imagine they will at least list him as questionable to leave that air of uncertainty there for the Bengals as we go into Sunday. I think there's a better chance this week. It seems like some of the work he's done has him in a better spot to possibly go. It'll be probably a question of how much he plays if he is, in fact, cleared for the game. But I think this week probably there's a good chance of him getting out there, at least in some capacity. It seems like it's trending in that direction, at least.
Yeah, when we spoke to Harrison, must have been about a week ago now, he had mentioned when he was asked, like, hey, the assumption is you're going to come back before missing 4 games. And he said, yeah, that's my understanding. So this would be, if he misses it, the 3rd game, which would put him on track to his expectation play in Dublin. It would be if he doesn't play Sunday.
Yeah, that would, you'd still be able to meet that qualification if you played in Dublin against the Steelers next week instead of on Sunday against the Bengals at home. But yeah, he's not a guy that wants to miss more time than he has to, and I think at whatever point he feels like he's ready to be out there, he's going to go and play, I would expect.
This is the first time he had missed back-to-back games in like 4 years.
Yeah.
Just doesn't do it very often.
No, he doesn't. And it's, for a long time of playing in the NFL, he's been awfully durable and has suited up through, a lot of things over the years, as any player that plays that long is going to have to do.
Let's go ahead and dive in on some of our listener questions. There were quite a few dropped specifically in the X replies that were just quite simply, why? Why is this happening? How long is this going to happen? Just like kind of vague, generic things like that. Unfortunately, we don't have those answers for you right now. We'll start with this one.
Trying to make you feel better, I guess.
Well, we're going to start on a lighter note because I thought this one was quite funny. From TC Mac SD on Threads. Should the Vikings buy Cam Akers a house in Minnesota since he has been added to the team 3 years in a row? Cam Akers, of course, back. He's on the practice squad. I would assume that he gets elevated on game day to be an extra body there in the running back room. But, Cam Akers back for a 3rd stint here.
What did he say? You heard him in the locker room. What did he say about this? This is a guy who's got literally the word resiliency, or is it resilient or resiliency, tattooed on his back. He's obviously been through quite a bit, but I thought he had an interesting remark about how he viewed his return here.
Yeah, I just actually listened back. It was online, but he was asked, of course, how helpful is it to come back to a place that you're familiar with? And he was like, it's just like water. It's flowing, and you just come back in and you know everything already. And I'm like, that makes sense. It's a kind of odd analogy, but it works.
It's like Bruce Lee. Daniil Hunter always quoted Bruce Lee, be like water, whatever.
Be water.
Yeah.
You probably got that from Everson Griffin, who was big into Bruce Lee from his work with Sean Mishka as movement coach.
That's right.
So, some more Bruce Lee from Cam Akers maybe.
Or he had landed 10,000 lakes. Maybe he's becoming a true Minnesotan. Yeah.
Wasn't born here. So, you can't be, but you can always try.
There was a question.
Good job, good effort.
There's a question about that for you in your replies that you should reply to on your own.
I don't make the rules, so take it up with people that do, which I think is Justin Gard at K-Fan. But, you got to be born here. And my wife is from Fargo, has lived most of her life here, and I tell her all the time, not one of us. Parents could have come across the border. Her parents are from Minnesota. They decided to have a baby in Fargo. It's like, should have planned better.
Wait a minute. Topical for this week, then. Carson Wentz is not one of us.
Not one of us.
He's going to have a bunch of Vikings fans, family, and friends there.
That's great.
Bismarck, North Dakota-born kid is not.
Happy for him. Not one of us.
Doesn't count.
No.
To close the loop on Akers.
Tough break, kid. I don't make the rules.
Close the loop on Akers and bring this back to football here.
She's also not one
How
of us.
much do we think... do we think there's a big possibility that Akers actually gets play time, or are they just really going to rely on Mason in this game?
He's probably the second running back, right? I mean, you brought him in, I think, in part because he knows the offense, in part because you can go to him pretty quickly. They're in a situation where they'll need somebody behind Jordan Mason with Ty Chandler hurt. I mean, Xavier Scott certainly can play and may get some of that work, but I think I would expect Cam Akers is activated or elevated from the practice squad, I should say, for this game. And I think there's a good chance he gets at least some run.
Yeah, because this is tough for them. There's no Aaron Jones, no C.J. Ham, no Ty Chandler. So you've got just Jordan Mason, and then you've got Xavier Scott on the 53. And then assuming Akers gets elevated, other than that, it's just, I think, Xavier Valade, who joined a day before the preseason finale, to be a cam body and a guy who got a roster spot on the practice squad anyway. So, this has got to be, I would imagine, an Akers elevation, a role for him. Xavier Scott has only played in one NFL game, and that was last week. So it's crazy how this happens. I think one player said in the locker room about the injuries, we're used to this. This is the NFL. And then he pauses and goes, but this is a little early for this. A little early for us this year.
It's usually more of a November, December thing.
From Russell R. on X, has the Vikings defense missed Harrison Smith more than we realized?
I think so, because when we talk about Cashman and Harrison Smith, those guys are critical to the communications. And Brian Flores said something this week about that when saying that we are a check-based system.
Yes.
And he's a guy who's going to be trusted to make some checks that, frankly, we're not going to put on other people. We're not going to ask Theo or Jay Ward, he didn't say this, but I'm just naming the guys who are out there. They're not going to ask those guys to do that. And Harrison's somebody who's so good at seeing everything and has seen everything through his NFL career. I think they've suffered for not having the level of adjustments they're used to having on field from the players who are empowered to do those things, whereas many other defenses will just say, well, let the coaches make adjustments on the sideline. No, they want to empower their guys, and they haven't really had those main communicators, including Cashman, out there very often.
Yeah, I would add Andrew Van Ginkel to that group too. Yeah. I mean, he's involved in some of those things and involved in kind of setting pass rush plans based on some of the checks that they see as well. So between Cashman, Van Ginkel, and Harrison Smith, there's a lot of brain power in this defense that has not been on the field. Yeah. I think that's a big deal. I mean, I think Harrison Smith plays a unique role on his own, kind of independent of that stuff, but his ability to set the secondary and kind of figure out where everybody needs to be based on what he's seen is unique. And when you take him out and add Cashman and Van Ginkel to it, I think we've seen the difference from that.
Well, and we've spent the past 3 weeks talking about how important experiences at the QB position.
Yeah.
I think it's the same for the safety position, at least in a similar way. At
least in this defense, certainly.
Right. The more you've seen, it's just easier to make those checks, to adjust on the fly, to know what's coming, even if it's not what you were expecting, in a way that, especially some of those younger secondary guys, like Theo Jackson, I think, has talent, but he doesn't have as much experience in those positions.
No, and I didn't mean to overstate it either. They've still played fairly good defense.
Yeah, they have.
It's not like they've struggled a ton. The only reason they were in that Falcons game is because of their defense, their red zone defense. I thought their coverage in the red zone was really good against Michael Penix, so they've still done some good things. But just in general, the what's the word I'm looking for? The tackles for losses, the plays, the negative plays that they are typically used to forcing on opponents have not seemed to be there.
Yeah.
It seems like they're giving up the 3, 4, 5-yard runs where some pre-snap checks might help them. It seems like the underneath passes, whether it's rallying and tackling without Cashman or Van Ginkel, as you mentioned, there have been some ways that they've suffered and struggled without these guys. But by and large, this has been a pretty solid defense so far.
Well, and I think you mentioned the checks, and the lack of experience on the field or the lack of experience in this system matters, because you're effectively asking somebody on your defense, whether it's Cashman, Van Ginkel, Harrison Smith, to do what a quarterback does on the other side of the ball. So we talk about this all the time with quarterbacks, where they've seen everything, they've seen every coverage, they've seen every defensive front, and they can make checks based off of that. The Vikings' approach with this defense is to say, no, we can actually answer this. We are not giving you the exclusive right to this power. We can do the same thing and hold the pen last, as Brian Flores likes to say. That is easier to do when you have experienced players who have done it, who can make those calls assertively, who may not be second-guessing themselves like a younger player might do, and who may just see things faster because they've got more of a Rolodex of things they've seen over the years. So I think all of that stuff, the way that this defense works, and we see them lean on experienced players a lot, probably to the point where we have a lot of conversations about how quickly do they need to turn things over to younger players. But I think part of the reason for that is that institutional knowledge, and the fact they haven't had it, I think, has showed up in that regard.
This was another question that we kind of got a few variants of. I went with this variant from KDSICEM on Threads. Since the line has been letting up a lot of pressure, why doesn't KOC add more quick game to his play calls? This was also a topic throughout the week, talking to coaches as well.
It was. It's an interesting question, and one that I wonder how much is philosophical versus how much is just what they had at quarterback and what they wanted to do. Darnold last year and Kirk before him were both very adept at leveraging passes downfield. Darnold obviously had a much better arm than Kirk and had a great year. J.J. McCarthy, they wanted to do that. We saw the shot plays, and we saw a lot of the run game and then the shot plays off of it in training camp. We just didn't see it materialize in these 2 games with him very often. So I wonder, with this quick game pivot, that they seem to at least be entertaining. Wes Phillips did mention it this week that we talked internally about doing things like that more. I wonder how much of it has to do with this switch to Carson Wentz, who has been known to get the ball out quickly from his hands. He's played in systems that do such things and, frankly, has seen more. And it requires, though, a simplification of the offense that, Ben, when you're talking about the check systems on defense and offense. It makes me think about how this Vikings team often wants to get the quarterback into quote unquote the perfect play.
Yes.
They want to arm them, as you mentioned, the players on the field. The quick game requires a simplification of the offense in a way that, frankly, the Vikings don't entertain too often.
No.
In terms of, like, the ball's going to go here, and yes, you're going to read some things, but as Wes Phillips said, the defense has to cover for that long, and it makes it that easy on the defense. And coaches don't necessarily like that. They like open guys, not just throw it and then trust you to break a tackle and run. So
finding the open grass is what we hear them talk about a lot.
Yeah, the voids out there.
Voids and vacancies.
Layering. Football. So I love all these things because that's what they talk about, that's what they want to do, but it flies in the face of what fans kind of want when they see that pressure and say, well, wait a minute, why are you max protecting for a 9-yard out to Justin Jefferson? Just throw him a screen pass. And O'Connell will say, I called 2 screen passes. Neither of them went anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of those had execution errors on them too, but one of the things that Wes Phillips talked about with this is that quick game is not just like an easy button all the time because it does require timing between the quarterback and the receiver that I think they've probably felt like a young quarterback isn't going to have down quite yet. And you look at J.J. McCarthy's time to throw, it's over 3 seconds for the year. That part of it is they haven't called a lot of quick game stuff, and they've had a couple of screens, like you mentioned, that didn't work out. But some of it is just getting him to get through reads quickly enough to get the ball out of his hand. And, Sam Darnold was not quick to throw last year either, and part of that was by design because they are trying to push the ball downfield. So I think given the philosophy of the offense, like you mentioned, and when you've had a younger quarterback that probably isn't quite locked in on timing with everybody quite yet, it is harder to do it than people might think. I mean, it's one of those things, as Wes Phillips talked about this week, it's a good reminder of this is not simply it's different than a check down. If it's a designed, scripted, quick game concept, and that's where the ball is supposed to go right off the bat, there is more complexity to it than, hey, we tried to get something downfield, this is the backup plan. This is the check down. Let's just take it. And
it is different. Like watching last night's game, we're recording this on Friday, watching last night's game with the Dolphins where you see Mike McDaniel, somebody from the Shanahan tree. You see Matt LaFleur, somebody from this similar system and styles. O'Connell's version of this just does not have a lot of the horizontal game aspects to it. We see elements with Jordan Addison when he's out there, but without Jordan Addison, they don't have that guy who can really make somebody miss. The Stephon Diggs type stutter stop. They don't have that talent right now. Naylor, as fast as he is, doesn't do a whole lot of that. They brought
It's supposed to be Rondale Moore.
Yeah, I was just going to say, they brought in Rondale Moore. Ty Felton's a young kid who can do it, but he's not getting offensive snaps. So they seem to be missing the talent and, frankly, the blocking on the perimeter. When they bring in Tim Jones to block for one of those screens, he totally misses the guy he's supposed to, and Mason gets tackled for 2 yards. Adam Thielen is 35 years old. Are you going to send him out there for a ton of run blocks? I've kind of sympathized a little bit with where they're at as a coaching staff and not having the blockers on the perimeter or, frankly, much of the install time to approach this. This is not how they wanted to do it.
No.
They wanted to run the ball. They wanted to leverage things, protect, and throw with what was supposed to be a good offensive line. And here it's week 3, and they might be starting Juergens and Blake Brandel.
Yeah, they installed an offense for pieces they expected to have. Yeah. And again, you run into that over the course of an NFL season. Everybody's going to go through that.
Yeah.
It's just this is awfully early to be doing that. I mean, sometimes if you're dealing with that November, December, it's like, hey, we've had some time together. Yeah. We have younger players. We have rookies or guys stepping into starting roles for the first time that have developed a little more of a routine where things are not new to them anymore. There's enough, and I think even you add to the training camp stuff where Justin Jefferson isn't practicing. Christian Darrisaw misses time as he's coming back. The amount of time the 11 players they'd want on the field together has actually had is very little. And you throw Jordan Addison's suspension in there too.
0 with him, yeah.
Right. So there's not a lot to draw on in terms of things in the bank yet. So it is unique in that sense. And they may get through it. I think you're expecting a lot of those guys back. None of these are season-ending things. But it just makes that process before they look smooth take a little longer.
Yeah, we probably, because he's out of sight, out of mind, we probably haven't talked about Addison enough as a guy that they could use as that quote-unquote easy button guy. Like, that is the underneath guy who could really make things happen for them after the catch that they've missed, and it's the guy that J.J. McCarthy, we saw all training camp, have the best rapport with.
Back next week. He will be back next week. They'll get to see him here for a few days before they go to Dublin, and then from there, I guess you hope that he's ready to hop back on the train and get at it after missing 3 weeks, but we don't know. We'll see. we're in a little bit of a time crunch here. I did want to just throw out this one that's a hypothetical because I do think it's a conversation we've had. It's a conversation the Vikings beat as a whole has had a little bit. But
I know where this is going.
From Jake W on X, if Carson Wentz were to play through the bye, play well, and if the Vikings were to go 3-0, who does the crystal ball say starts against Philadelphia on October 19th?
Crystal ball is typically on a different show.
Yeah, that shout out Matthew Collar.
When I'm over with Collar and we do the crystal ball bit, that's probably running on 10 years now, but we can steal it for the time being. This is like, when a half of a band, like the one guy that's gone solo still, or with the new band still plays the songs from the old one. So we'll do that or something like that. I can do Liam and Collar will be Noel Gallagher, but not Blur. Sorry, Mike Rand. Oasis it's topical with the way this season has gone.
Anyway,
with the
Wonderwall.
Soldier
I know.
Field.
Yeah.
Time crunch, though. Time crunch. What do we think? Crystal ball.
What do we think? I think J.J. McCarthy still gets back on the field because they have to have an answer to that question by the end of the year. I understand who's starting October 19th, I think is a different question. I don't know that it would be J.J. McCarthy right away, but I don't think – I'll answer it this way. I don't think McCarthy would be confined to the castle tower where no one can get to him throughout the course of that season. I think you need to have some idea by the end of this year what you have. The tricky part is if they go win 3 games with Carson Wentz and you have a locker room full of veteran players that want to win now, guys like Harrison Smith, guys like Adam Thielen that maybe in their last years in long careers in Minnesota, it is a harder sell. And I think there's a lot of belief. There's players that have talked about a lot of belief in J.J. McCarthy, but you've been through 2 tough games. If you have 3 go well, I think it is hard to sell that back to players right away. So I think my answer to that would be I would expect it's probably still Wentz coming out of the bye, but I would imagine they try to get back to McCarthy. If Wentz has a slip up at some point, I could see them saying we're going to go back to the kid. It's a tough situation because they do have so much riding on him and so much reputational capital staked on him that you need to figure out what he's going to be, but you also have a roster that's built to win now.
I have no idea, but I do wonder if there's an element of Kevin O'Connell wanting a reason to be patient with McCarthy right now.
Yeah.
Wanting a reason to kind of say, you know what, let's just take a breather beyond the injury. So I don't know. I don't know that. And I don't know if truth serum would even get it out of him at this point.
Yeah.
But it's a fascinating question, and it's a difficult spot that they're in because you just need production. The 254, I believe, yards passing they had in these 2 games are the fewest in back-to-back games under O'Connell since he came here. That's only just under the Dobbs era Bears into the Raiders that got him benched. So it shows you kind of where this lack of production was at with the offense. They need more from it. They're too talented for it. And I think the point you made about selling it to the locker room is the biggest part. This is a veteran-laden squad. They paid a ton of money in free agency for a veteran-laden squad that needs to win. And if Wentz is 3-0, how do you bench him?
Yeah, I mean, that you would, if you were going to do it, you'd have to have a very good way to explain it to that locker room.
Yeah.
And that would be the first piece of it.
It's a fascinating question. It's one I'm sure we will continue to talk about, especially once we see what Carson Wentz can do with this offense starting Sunday afternoon. I was about to say Sunday night. We've had so many night games so
I've
far.
almost said it like 2 or 3 times this podcast.
Sunday,
I almost said night just out of
Sunday
force
at noon when the Bengals come to town. That's an early one at US Bank Stadium. But until then, keep up with all of our work on the StarTribune.com. You can also follow along on the Strip Sports Instagram page, and we will talk to you post-game Sunday afternoon.